Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the Health for a Change January 2015 webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left corner of your screen. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press *0. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded Wednesday, January 28, 2015. I would now like to turn the conference over to Erica. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Benjamin. Good afternoon. I'm Erica Bender-Wooten, the Senior Program Officer at the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. Thank you all for joining the webinar today. This webinar is part of the Foundation's Health for a Change training series. This free series is comprised of webinars and in-person workshops designed to support the efforts of Kentucky's community health coalitions, agencies, health advocates, and other interested community members. I'd like to begin today's webinar with a brief introduction to the Foundation. The Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky was founded in 2001 with a mission to address the unmet healthcare needs of Kentuckians. The Foundation currently has two main focus areas: promoting responsive health policy, which aims to make public policy more responsive to the health and healthcare needs of the people of Kentucky, and investing in Kentucky's future, which aims to improve the health of Kentucky's children by engaging communities in testing innovative strategies. The Foundation fulfills its mission through a variety of activities, which include grant making, supporting targeted research, convening key stakeholders, providing policymakers with the information needed to make decisions which impact the health of Kentuckians, and by offering training and technical assistance through events like this one. Next, I want to direct you to the Foundation's website, healthy-ky.org. There you will find archives of past Health for a Change webinars, Foundation reports, and issue briefs, and an upcoming event schedule. On today's webinar, we will hear from Caroline Herbert, the Instructional Design Manager for the Foundation Center. She has a great presentation planned for you today. As the moderator mentioned, you may submit questions via the chat feature, and there will be a question and answer session at the end of Caroline's presentation. Before I turn things over to Caroline, I'd like to provide you with a brief introduction. Caroline has been teaching courses in fundraising, grants research, proposal writing, and other related topics since joining the Foundation Center in 1998. She's been immersed in the social sector for over 20 years as a trainer, librarian, and fundraiser. Welcome, Caroline. We're honored to have you join us today.
Thank you, Erica, and happy to be here with you today. I just wanted to add an additional note for my introduction. I'm going to be talking to you today about grants management from two perspectives. One as a practitioner with experience being a project leader and managing grants and reporting back to funders. Then also from my perch at the Foundation Center, where we hear from a lot of funders about best practices related to grant seeking and grants management. So briefly, to go over our agenda for today, we're going to start with a little intro to the Foundation Center. So if you're not familiar with us, you'll get a little bit more information. And then we're going to go into the main presentation on grants management, which is designed to really take you through the whole process of working with a funder once you get the grant award letter. That's where we're starting, where you got a grant. And we're going to talk about that initial award letter, managing the grant in-house, keeping connected to the funder, and reporting back. And throughout, we're going to be emphasizing maintaining a smooth, consistent relationship with open communication. And Erica was kind enough to share the registration list with me. So I see that we have folks from all over the state and from a wide range of institutions, health departments, universities, hospitals, to community-based organizations. And I say all that because I know you're considering the size and scope of your organizations. You will all have different situations and setups, so not everything I say may apply to you, but I hope you can all take some tips away from the webinar. All right, so here's our brief intro to the Foundation Center. We've been around since 1956. We're also a nonprofit organization. We have 5 offices around the country. I'm based out of our Washington, D.C. office, if you're curious about my location. I was just in Kentucky over Christmas because I have relatives at Fort Knox, so just was in your state. Anyway, we've been around for a while, and our mission has always been to advance the social sector, strengthen the social sector by advancing knowledge about philanthropy. One of the main ways we do that is by collecting information on foundations, and we are the nation's leading authority on private philanthropy. We have a database that you can use to research funders called Foundation Director Online. We are in your community. We have a funding information network around the world, almost 500 locations, 5 of which are in Kentucky. We also have an extensive website called GrantSpace. So I'm going to touch on all of these and then get into grants management. So Foundation Director Online, there are different levels of access from free to paid. Here's a free version, and you will be getting, as one of your handouts, a resource list with a ton of websites. So don't worry about having to write all this down. In the free version, you can do quick searches by location, as I did here for Kentucky, to bring up a list of all the foundations in your state, almost 600. And you can click on their names and you would get brief profiles, contact information, etc. So let's take a look at what you can do in the paid version. And I know you're probably saying, we don't have budget for this. We can't afford a database subscription. But remember I said there's that funding information network of locations around the world. That's where people can go to use this database free of charge. So you can invest your time, invest your money to do your funding research. So the difference here, I know the screen looks the same, but we can add in interest areas, type of support. So it's not just who's in my state, it's who cares about my issue, to bring up a very different list of targeted funders. And I see our host here is showing up as well, as we would expect. All right, so how do I find a location near me? It sounds great. I want to go use it right now. Well, after the webinar, I hope. Well, here's that GrantSpace website I mentioned, and I added this big red arrow where you can go find us. You can even, from this home page, put in your zip code, or go to the page, and what I did is put in the state so I could bring up the list of the 5 in Kentucky. And of course, as you see, if you did your zip code, it would give you, who's closest to you. So depending on where you are in Kentucky, there may be a collection in a neighboring state that would actually be closer. And this is also part of your resource list. I did give you this list of locations with their websites and contact information. And just getting back on GrantSpace for a second, when you have time to explore, we have different skill areas like developing proposals, evaluation, as well as, of course, our classroom to learn about other courses we offer, and tools like frequently asked questions. Speaking of tools, we publish some books, including one entitled After the Grant, The Nonprofit's Guide to Good Stewardship, which we drew from when creating this presentation. And this book was written based on many, many interviews with funders. So it's really talking about best practices. And our hosts at Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky will be giving away a copy of this book at the end of the webinar to a lucky attendee. And if you're not the lucky winner, you can always find it at one of those funding information network partners. They all have our books in their collections. All right, so let's get into grants management now that I've told you about Foundation Center. And partnership, you hear a lot when you're talking about foundation fundraising, building relationships. You want to be a partner with your funder. So what does that really mean? Well, it means you both have something to offer. I think we've all gotten away from the image of the needy nonprofit organization as the supplicant in this relationship. No, you have a lot to offer. Your great ideas, your programs, your solutions, your people to help the foundation advance their mission. You care about the same things, and you can work together to have impact in your communities. So we're going to keep this in mind as we go through our presentation, that we really are trying to establish a partnership and going into it with that mindset. We'll be covering various stages of stewardship, as I said, starting with your notification. Hey, you got the grant. Congratulations. Now the real work begins. So we're going to go through reviewing the award letter, managing the grant, and reporting. So let's get started with the framework for the relationship. You already frame the relationship with your proposal. As in any relationship, both you and your funder have responsibilities. So in the proposal, that's how you told them. You have a commitment to a shared area of interest. This is your promise. The proposal is your promise to the funder. These are the results we'll see. This is what we can do with your help. And from the Grantmakers' perspective, the award letter is where they are framing their expectations of us. So the funder will be accountable to you for funds awarded, provided that you are accountable for what you said you would do, the deliverables, to use that jargon. But really, as we're saying with the whole concept of partnership, we are trying to get beyond that transaction of money for results, to really to move beyond the transactional level. So that's something else we'll be visiting throughout this presentation, how we can really build into a real relationship. So looking at the award letter, this is pretty standard language that you may see. And by the way, all of these little quotes and excerpts come from the book after the grant. Here is an example of an actual grant letter template from, well, the name of the funder doesn't matter. It's a Children's Healthcare Foundation. We use this because it is a very good template, and a lot of what you see is pretty standard. And I want to highlight the first paragraph. And notice it looks like there's going to be a lot that the funder would be filling in, which is true. They're going to, it's your name of your project, the description of your project. They're going to get all that from your proposal. And often you will see your objectives or outcomes listed. This is what's going to happen during the grant period. This is why we're giving you a grant to do X, Y, Z. So, the first thing you need to check, I think, is pretty clear. Is this all correct? Because, certainly there could be clerical errors, like, anyone doing a big mail merge and if they're sending out a lot of letters at the same time, there could be a simple mistake where they've confused you with another grantee, and that's easy to fix if it's that kind of error. There could also be changes to the expectations from what you put in your grant proposal. This has happened to me. I sent in a proposal for a relatively modest training program, saying Foundation Center would do capacity building trainings in 3 cities in Texas. And we got the grant. It's great news. And we took a look at the expectations, and it was 6 cities. So they had upped the game and raised the expectations. So that was the kind of thing that, I think they had one conversation with maybe someone in our development department, but actually coming through to the program people who are going to be doing the work, seeing that, was like, okay, well, we need to think about this. Can we live up to these new expectations? Now, that doesn't usually happen, but always good to check to make sure that everything is in alignment. And note the use of funds clause. So that's pretty standard, legal language. You use this money for the funds specified for charitable purposes. Also, there's clause 2 about returning unused funds. This is something we're going to be talking about with grants management, making sure you spend out in a timely manner and don't have money left over, so you're not in the position to, as they say, return money to the foundation. Don't want to have to do that. Reporting. So, of course, I know all these dates are out of date. That's not the point. It's to see that you may have a lot you'll be putting into your calendar. In this case, there's a midterm interim report. There's also first quarter expenditure report, third quarter. So essentially they want to hear from you throughout the grant period. Something is going to be due every quarter. So I'd say this is more at the high end. Often I see an interim report and a final report, but you never know. So making sure you note all of these reporting requirements, and again, making sure you can live up to it, and there's nothing that's really going to knock you off balance. The publicity clause, this is pretty standard that we may refer to this. If you need guidance in terms of how to announce this, consult with us. I've seen very, very detailed requirements in terms of how the foundation must be referenced in any publicity, with making sure you use the in all references to the foundation or things like that. So that's typical. And then more legalese related to tax status, and yes, you're legal, and it says by signing this, you're accountable. You are legally responsible for the funds. So who is looking at this, and who's signing the letter, and who's on our grants management team? Well, this is where it really, of course, really depends on your organization and how many people you have involved. And I know we have folks from large and small organizations on the webinar, so take what's relevant to you. But as you all know, it makes the most sense to have one point of contact with the foundation. So often if you have development staff, that's who it will be. Someone in your development department who's going to be the main line of communication with the foundation. So the staff person at the foundation who's in charge of managing your grant, typically called a program officer, it's helpful that they know there's one person they can start with questions in terms of a point of contact. So other people who are going to be involved, of course, are the people running the project on a day-to-day basis, which usually is not the people in the development department. So if you're the fundraiser, if you're the one who wrote the proposal and is managing the relationship with the funder, I see it as your key role to keep everyone else accountable and make sure that people know when those reporting deadlines are and know what's expected. So the project leadership, the program people, the ones in charge of actually delivering the results, development, and then finance. So the people who are going to be helping you with those expenditure reports and making sure that the grant funds are tracked according to the budget that was approved by the foundation, and telling you this is what's happening in terms of how you're spending the money and making sure that's all on track. So those are the key players on a grants management team. The agreement is, we already talked about comparing it with the proposal you submitted, usually must be signed by your CEO, executive director, the key staff leader. Sometimes I've seen grant agreement contracts that require the chair of the board to also sign on. So you need to pay attention to that kind of thing. Or you may, at your organization, your internal procedures may require board approval for accepting grants of a certain size. So you know what applies to you. All right, so the other thing, I'm sorry, I didn't mention this when we were looking at that sample grant agreement letter, the dollar amount, certainly. Besides just, do the objectives line up from the proposal, how much are they giving us? If they're not giving you exactly what you asked for in the proposal, obviously that's something you'd be talking about with the finance person. This is how much we have applied to this program, and often you have multiple grants that are helping to cover the whole budget. So all of this needs to be agreed upon by, of course, the project leaders, you in development, making sure that if that's you, making sure that you're on top of all this. If you're going to do public relations, publicity about the grant, you may be involving someone from communications or marketing, or it may all be one person if you're a small shop. If you do run into any issues that you think may be a problem for you living up to your end of the bargain for fulfilling the deliverables, reporting, anything you see in the grant agreement letter that's a red flag or confuses you, you have any questions, as we know, much, much better to clarify everything at the beginning than muddle through and not really be sure what's going on. So usually it could be the executive director taking the lead in the communication, the project leader, could be the development person if it's depending on the nature of the confusion. Certainly just a clarifying question doesn't need to be the CEO getting on the phone. The other thing to clarify, I think we mentioned this already with your finance person, are there any restrictions related to how you could use the funds? For example, you cannot use any money from this grant to go towards our overhead expenses. I've had grants where we couldn't use any of the money to pay for food in a training program where we were bringing people in all day. So, just to know any kind of restrictions in terms of how you can spend the money. And then you're ready to go. You're thanking the funder, you're signing the contract, sending it back, thanking them, and then you're doing the work. And it is making sure the money is being spent according to their expectations, that the activities are executed, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, to be successful. I mean, that's really what's expected of you, to do what you said you were going to do and be successful. All right, so let's talk about how this is really going to work on the ground. And accountability is our watchword, right? So that's why we talked about one person, actually, someone in development is keeping everyone on track. Depending on the kind of systems you have in your organization, shared calendars, even Google Docs, a spreadsheet, you may even have fancy grants management software. Whatever you have, someone is keeping on top of this, programming, the calendar reminders. I like to have, as a program manager, I like to know at least a month before a report's due, if not earlier, so that I can start getting things ready. But really figuring it out all in advance, not just, oh, wow, a month ahead of time, I have this report to do. I better start thinking about that. That's not ideal. So thinking ahead of time, okay, what do we need to have ready when? Okay, we have that first quarter expenditure report. Okay, who's responsible for that? How's it going to happen? Making sure that that person gets reminded and knows exactly what he or she is supposed to do. The narrative report, who's going to be the lead in writing that? What kind of information does that person need? Who's going to track all of the activities and results? And I think it comes down to, of course, all right, you start with your proposal and the grant agreement letter. What did we say we were going to do? And what did we say in the evaluation section? Because notice we have the reference to collecting data. What did we say we were going to collect? And is this something we're already doing, if it's an existing program? Or do we suddenly need to start tracking everyone who walks into our health center who doesn't speak English because we have a grant specifically for Spanish language outreach? So are there new things you have to track? Are there, are you looking at attendance, retention, all those kinds of systems? And it's really looking at accountability throughout your team. And it's the program manager, from the program manager on down. So the program manager, the program lead, may know everything she has to do, but if she's not communicating with the rest of her staff, you're not going to get very far. So I think sharing information about the grant with your key leaders, project director, development person, finance person, 3 key people who should be checking in regularly. We talked about periodic team meetings on the previous slide. But those people have to be sharing with their staff. So it's trust throughout the organization that people are going to be accountable. Here's a very basic timeline for grant award management, generic. So of course, if you got a grant from that Children's Healthcare Foundation, you'd have to have your interim report, your quarterly expenditure reports, etc. But notice we're having, of course, within a week, we're doing the internal huddle. Within the first quarter, email a photo and a good news update. What are we talking about there? Well, we'll get to that in a second when we talk about ongoing communications. But it's really thinking about, all right, well, we know what's required. And if you are working with a funder that has, an interim report and a final report, why should we communicate in the first quarter? We don't have to. Well, somebody check in to say, hey, we started the program, or things are going along. We already have some progress to share, and if it's a good hands-on program with that's photogenic, you may even email a photo. Then towards the end, we are looking ahead. What's the looking ahead meeting call? It's really planning for continuing your relationship and setting up with the funder. Check in at the end, towards the end of the grant period. Wanted to update you on progress, getting ready to do the final report, and if it is possible to renew the grant funds or do another request, trying to get a sense of, or informing the funder what you're expecting to change in the program, what may be updated. All right, so let's talk for a minute about systems again. So a grant management calendar, it can be do-it-yourself. If your organization is already very dependent on shared Outlook calendars or Google calendars or whatever you use, you can keep using it. You could also look for specific donor or grant management software. So we do have, and this again is on the resource list you'll be getting, the systems for software systems. This is a general knowledge base article about software, with links to many different guides to software like TechSoup. I just went to their website and did a quick search on grants management to come up with a number of resources if you're looking for software. However, there is nothing wrong with low tech, and again, I think all the gain a fancy database is not going to help you if people aren't talking to each other and you don't have the internal communications. So I think as a program manager myself, working in a large organization with a development department, the biggest challenges I've had are when development people assume that we know what we're supposed to do and vice versa. So no assumptions. I think it's better to be accused of nagging someone than saying, oh, they know what to do, I'm not going to bother them. And it turns out they don't know what to do, and they miss a deadline because you weren't on top of it. So better to be the pest, I think, than to let things slide. All right, so let's move from internal communications to your communications with the funder. So a lot of trends influencing Grantmaker communications, which should not be that surprising to you. Certainly during the recession, many organizations had to cut back on staff, including foundations. And like other types of nonprofits, they may not have ramped back up, or maybe are just restaffing. So may still be understaffed, maybe pressed for time like all of us. Therefore, they've set up a lot of systems for grantee communications. That's why they have those reporting forms and specific deadlines that they want you to meet to help them do their job better by setting up these systems. So they're looking for brevity in your reporting, answering the questions directly, and a lot of detail related to the outcomes. And I should note that you cannot assume that your plan for communications and reporting is a one-size-fits-all solution. As we know, different grant makers will have different requirements. So just like you can't send the same proposal to everybody, you're not going to have the same relationship with every funder. So what works for one funder may not work for another. You may have one foundation where they want to hear from you on a regular basis. Others just, we have the required reports. You don't need to keep in touch outside of that. So how might we engage the grant maker beyond the required reports and moving beyond, as we say here, moving beyond the wallet? So this is looking, again, at grant makers as partners, and I think our host is a great example of a funder that does a lot more than provide grants, that they have training programs, capacity building programs. Other foundations may help you to pay for executive coaching for your leadership, help connect you to other resources in the community, introduce your work to other opinion makers, other funders. So what do we need to think about in terms of engaging them and perhaps deepening this relationship? Well, transparency, being candid, those are your watchwords for all of this. And you may be thinking, I doubt it since you tuned into this webinar, but you may be thinking, well, why do I need to have a whole communications plan? I know when the reports are due. I'm going to be doing the work. What more is there? And why should I even think about going above and beyond what's required of me? Well, here's why. Your program officer, staff at the foundation, they're advocate at the foundation. They made the case for you to get funding, and they are your champion with their colleagues, the board of directors, wanting you to succeed. So their voice carries weight not just within their own institution, but also among their philanthropic colleagues. So of course, building your network, hoping to gain access or introduction to other funders or stakeholders in the community to really help, to help advance your mission. So trying to deepen these relationships when possible may help you broaden your reach and deliver more mission. We know that's our objective in all of our fundraising activities, right? To deliver more mission and have a greater impact. So this isn't just adding funders to all our e-blasts and signing them up for all communications and they're hearing from us every day. We know that's crazy. You're thinking about very selective, high-quality updates. So you're not automatically adding them to your e-blasts unless they want to. So you can ask permission. Here's a good example. If you have a really good advocacy alert that you send out on a regular basis, and your funder, the funder is very interested in healthcare policy, advocacy issues, they may want to get that advocacy alert. So that's something I would ask about. So not necessarily your generic communications, but if you have something specialized they might be interested in, worth asking. But I wouldn't add them automatically to any kind of mass mailing. So your job is to keep them up to date but not bombard them with information. So I know it is a fine line, and it is going to be, really seeing how it goes and testing and seeing what's going to work, how much do they want to hear from you. So in terms of the meetings, the funder may have already visited you. They may have done a site visit as part of the whole process. If that's the case, you can certainly invite them to come out again. If maybe you've moved, you're marking an important milestone, like a graduation, an open house, community open house. If you do donor recognition events, there are a lot of things you can think about. Occasions where you may invite a funder to come out to your space. If you have major leadership changes, that often is cause for, hey, we want to meet with you, we want you to meet our new executive director, if it's someone in your top leadership. So really, as we know, personal interactions, if you can, get the face-to-face contact to really build the trust relationship. And, of course, sharing successes. So beyond the mandated reporting, if you have program highlights to share, maybe thinking to start out quarterly. So at least quarterly, do we have some news to share? So you may have a first quarter report even if it's not required, wanting to share success. Of course, if you get any public recognition, endorsements, key community partners, new funders coming on board, this is all good news to share. And we'll be talking about bad news too later on. So recognizing them. We already talked about if they have requirements for how they want to be recognized publicly, but you're going to make sure you are recognizing them whenever appropriate. If you are, if you're making a presentation at a conference about the program they're funding, good idea to acknowledge them. And here's another tip related to publicity. We had a reference earlier to sending a photo. Why would you want to do that? Well, you can help the funder populate their website, their annual report. They may be looking for photos of their grants in action. So it can definitely help if you're sending good photos for them to use. So let's talk more about how we can involve them in these activities beyond the grant. So those high quality opportunities we were talking about. So this is not a high quality opportunity. It says, very small print, "Are you the foundation grant I've been hearing so much about?" So often, this can be, a program officer may feel like this, that they have the big button or $sign on their lapel, and everyone sees them as the wallet. But we do want to move beyond that in this relationship. So let's think again about the program officer. We already talked about them as our champion at the foundation. They're also a natural colleague. You all care about the same things. You're coming together because you want to meet I know I'm going to mangle your mission statement here. I apologize, Erica. You want to meet the unmet health needs of Kentuckians. You both care about those issues, same constituencies. And the program officer is, part of their success is measured by the success of the grants they recommend. So we need to support them in every way possible. So what are the high-value events? Well, panel presentations, so inviting them to speak. I'm not just calling you because I need money. I'd like you to be on a panel. I'd like you to do a keynote speech. I'd like you to speak to the youth in our health mentorship program. And giving them opportunities to connect with your mission, connect with your constituents, beyond just talking about money. Now, of course, they may not accept every invitation. In fact, they probably are not able to accept every invitation, but giving them the opportunity and keeping your organization, in their mind that you see them as part of your community is important. So also, another thing we could put on this list is high-value networking opportunities. So really seeing them seeing your organization as a valuable partner in the community to help them make new connections, to really help them do their job better. And that's what you're really trying to do. Also supporting their careers. So what we're talking about with if you're communicating to the head of the foundation, like if you do a holiday letter or some kind of annual report to donors that are going to the president of a foundation, mentioning how much you enjoy working with the program officer. I know we can easily fall into the pandering, so you got to be careful that it's not the empty flattery. but it certainly helps to support the program officer within the foundation. So again, what do we have that would really help them in their work? Because they are looking at their grantees, their portfolio of grantees, to help them learn about the field, to get the word on the street. So do you have research you can share? Can you invite them to meet constituents or other events that would be of interest to them or their interns, other staff? It's really looking at your organization as a key partner and that shift from not just a grantee but a colleague and a valued partner. All right, all this is very nice, and we all have warm, fuzzy feelings now about our foundations. But what if we run into trouble? It does happen. Not everything goes well. So what do you do? So first of all, what kind of trouble are we talking about? Well, staff changes are a big one. And I've actually gone through this quite a bit in the past year with some leadership changes within my little world at Foundation Center. So we've had multiple people in charge of programs and multiple communications with funders about these kinds of changes. So that's one thing. Also, of course, anything related to the program. So you're looking at the grant guidelines. You know what's expected of you. If you are not able to meet those requirements, that's the kind of trouble we're talking about. So spending out. There's a holdup. We can't complete the program on time. We can't spend all the money within the calendar year or fiscal year. Remember, you don't want to be in the position of sending money back. So you need to talk to the funder. Could we carry over funds? Could we amend the budget? What can we do to still meet all of our requirements? So financial changes, leadership changes, if the scope of the program has changed, where you may not be able to meet all of the objectives. Or even if the organization's moving in a different direction and you're having the program, you may have a little orphan program where you're changing your scope, this isn't a priority anymore, but you still have to fulfill these obligations. Keep the funder informed. We're moving in different directions. But we're still very excited to see through this program. But letting them know there may be changes, and how can you work together to still fulfill all of their expectations. That's the key word, together. Not you going off on your own, telling them after the fact. Of course, the less common problems are the really terrible scandals, serious financial difficulties affecting your entire organization and not just the program. And in those cases, you really need to protect your program officer. So they need to hear it from you before they hear the gossip on the street, or worst case scenario, hearing it from a colleague or someone on the board of the foundation. Wow, that organization's really a mess. Don't you fund them? What's going on? That is the last thing we want to have happen to the program officer. So definitely need to talk to them before they hear it any other way. And certainly when if it's an issue related to the program, that we need to carry over grant funds. So recently happened with the program I'm involved with, where there's one key component where we weren't able to complete within 2014. So had a conversation. This is what happened. So a little bit about the trouble. This is what happened. This is what we're thinking about in terms of how to resolve that. And having it be, again, two-way communication. Not we have all the answers, but what have you seen? Have you seen this before? What's worked? What's your experience? And working on a solution together. And certainly if, within reason, funders will accept, amendments to the budget. The timeline may be acceptable within as long as it's approved. Totally change, we're going to do something completely different with your money, by the way, is not acceptable and not reasonable. So we have about 5 minutes or so left to talk about reporting, our last section here, and then open it up for any questions. So first of all, how do funders use reports? Well, the most obvious is to see, did you do what you said you were going to do? Are you accountable? And they're looking to see, were we successful, the foundation? So they gave you a grant so they could help fulfill their mission. So they want to see what your success was. They want to see best practices. They want to benchmark results. They may be publishing their own research, case studies. Your evaluation may show up in a presentation or other publication. So it's great if the funder reaches out to you to say, can we cite your research in our study? So they have a number of reasons to ask for reports, not just because they like us to fill out forms. What do they want to see? Well, what happened? Did it work? How did you spend the money? If it didn't work, why not? What did you learn? What's going on with the program? Are there any future plans? One of my favorite questions is always, did you experience any unanticipated positive outcomes as a result of the project? And we actually have an example from a local funder, James Graham Brown Foundations, shared their outline for reports. So you can see a number of common questions. And notice they refer back to what I'm assuming would be the original grant agreement. So very important when you're writing the report that you have the original proposal, grant agreement, budget, everything in front of you, so you're able to so you know exactly what language to use. Because often you do want to repeat that and make sure you're starting from the same place. They also shared their finance report, expenditure report guidelines, which essentially is, tell us what you actually budgeted, how the money was spent, and often, if there are variances, they want an explanation. However, I would say if they're serious variances, you should have already been talking to them way before this stage. So the report should not have any amazing, shocking surprises. That should have already been communicated with the funder. If they don't have a form, here's an example, and this is going to be one of your handouts. A sample report didn't have a form. They wrote it all into a cover letter, which will also work and is acceptable. Often for the report, you're going to have a cover letter, the report narrative, and your financial reports. And probably, just like with the proposal, you're going to have some standard language you can include in reports that you're sending to multiple funders. But, one other thing to check is to make sure you're sending the right report to the right funder and mentioning them by name. That's the kind of thing that could get their goat if we're talking about pet peeves. And it's the kind of thing you may think, oh, well, the program officer, the staff person may not care that much if there's oh, look, they messed up the mail merge. They're talking about another funder, not us. But someone on the board of a foundation may take that very seriously and be offended that you didn't refer to them correctly. Common pet peeves, and this comes from that book, After the Grant. I think not answering the questions is the biggest pet peeve. Just, we want to know certain things, and you need to just tell us directly. So not a lot of fluff, not a lot of padding, dancing around the question, just answer the question. Missing deadlines was the other big thing. Program officers are depending on getting these reports on time so they can close out the grant portfolio for the year. So if you think you're going to be late, give them a heads up so they know that you're not, totally ignoring them. The worst thing is they don't hear from you during the grant period, then the report's late and no communication. So that's a good way to not get a grant again. So to wrap up, I think we have a good list here of what we would expect in a relationship. So we are working with funders where we have complementary goals. We're sticking with our side of the bargain. We're responsive. We're following through. And we're looking at each grant as part of a long-term relationship to really share what we're learning about our work in the field, how we solve problems together, and hopefully have a long, beautiful relationship and a true partnership. And I believe, Erica, we have some questions to look at.
Yes, Caroline, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. At this time, if you haven't had a chance to chat in a question, please feel free to do so. And Caroline, we do have a couple questions in queue. The first one is, what are some common grant management mistakes,
Yeah, so I think I actually just went over a few of them with that list of pet peeves that came up after the grant. Certainly, I think missing deadlines is a huge mistake that we all know. That's an obvious one. Not communicating with the funder. And really, I think, if you're wondering, is this something I really need to talk to the funder about? Is this a big enough issue? I say better safe than sorry is my watchword. And I think it's better to communicate and have it not be a big deal than to not communicate and really mess up the relationship. And also, internally, I think I mentioned this earlier, is not having the clear lines of communication within your organization and other people, people assuming that, so-and-so is going to take care of this when it's not being taken care of.
Sure. Thank you. Those were helpful. I'm going to paraphrase this next question. You talked a bit about funders wanting to be more engaged, and this person would like to know, how do you know kind of what's an appropriate amount and form of communication with the funder? We're kind of in a new era where funders want to be engaged, but how do you find the balance with that?
Right. Well, it is going to be a learning process with each funder. So this, as we know, this is really the joy and the challenge of foundation fundraising, from beginning, in terms of first reaching out to them and doing your application and through the grants management process. They are all unique. So what works for one will not work with another. So I'm afraid, you can learn some best practices as we just outlined, but it's still going to be seeing what works for each funder. So I would start out with that idea of quarterly touch points. With can we, is there news to share, the good news update, progress reports, progress report to donors on a quarterly basis, just to see as a starting point. And certainly, if your organization is, publishing white papers, if you do an annual report, there will be some kind of built-in points of communication if you're able to take advantage of them. Like, we know our annual report, is always available by March, if you're on a calendar year. So that's a good touch point, that we're going to be sending that out to all our donors with a quick update on the program they're funding. And then in terms, as I mentioned earlier, with adding people to get email updates or things like that, it's really, you can always ask, how often would you like to hear from us? We have, a very helpful, health policy brief we send out every month. Would you like to receive that, or anyone on your staff? So, it is okay to ask permission and see how often they want to hear from you.
Great, and I think we have time for one last question, and I believe you covered this in your presentation, but maybe if you could just circle back on some of it. Tips for managing multiple grants at the same time.
Right. Yes. Well, I think it goes without saying that you want the most detail-oriented person on board to manage all of this. And I think even if you're not investing in some kind of fancy grants management software, having a really good calendar system, and if someone still has to program in all of these deadlines and touch points. So, starting with all the mandated reports for every foundation and, working backwards to, draft is due. So putting together this internal calendar and deadlines. So if you're the development person, telling all the program people, your report is due maybe, 2 months before the real deadline or whatever is going to work for you in terms of how much lead time you need. And then accountability, communication, we can't say it enough. And I think, for all of us, eventually you may have to ask the question, is it worth the money? So there is such thing, I know it sounds crazy, but there may be such a thing as having too many grants. If you have too many small grants with reporting requirements that you're not able to keep up with, that can be a clue to you, a signal that, wait a minute, we're not able to handle the grants management. We have too many balls in the air, too many moving pieces. What's really going to work for us in terms of what's manageable? And I know this may sound crazy if you're starting in foundation fundraising and wondering, it would be great to have a grant at all or even a few, but you may reach the point where I've seen foundation reporting requirements that may not be worth if it's a relatively small amount of money. Now, certainly if it's huge investment on the part of the foundation and really going to advance your mission, it's definitely worth it to do whatever you need to do to manage the grant. But you do need to ask yourself the question, what's realistic for us and how can we ramp up? If we're ramping up our efforts in terms of bringing in more grant funding, are we able to manage this process so it doesn't get away from us?
Great.
So
Thank you, Caroline.
We moved more into your overall nonprofit management and staffing issues, but it may come to that point.
Great. Well, Caroline, I want to thank you for being our speaker today and thank all of you who participated. I'm glad you joined us, and I'd appreciate your feedback regarding today's webinar. This afternoon, you will receive an email with handouts from the presentation and a link to a post-event survey. If you could, please take a few moments to complete this evaluation. We're currently soliciting ideas for future webinars, and your feedback is really important. A recording of this webinar will be posted on the Foundation website in a few days. Please contact me if I can be of any further assistance. And last but not least, the winner of the Foundation Center book, After the Grant, The Nonprofit's Guide to Good Stewardship, is Delois Yance. So Delois, I'll be in contact with you to get an address to mail that book to you. Congratulations, and thank you all for your participation today.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, everyone. It was great to talk to you today.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude today's conference call. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect your lines.